All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Thank you everyone for joining to hear and see and taste everything from Mariah Gladstone. She's a Blackfeet Cherokee. She grew up in the Northwest Montana on and near the Blackfeet Reservation. She graduated from Columbia with a degree in environmental engineering and returned home where she began her work on food advocacy. She's received tons of awards, too many for us to go through right now. And she just released her first book, Mountains to Oceans, Kids Recipes from Native Land, in January 2025. That's the book that you all have right now. And for this demo, she's going to be showing you all the marinated steak and bell peppers roll-ups. If you want to follow along with that, feel free to hop onto a table if you want, anyone, kids, non-kids, kids at heart. And thank you everyone for being here. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this event, the Howry Foundation, the College of Public Health, and the U of A bookstore for doing such a great job in getting everything set up. So thank you everyone. Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you, I'm Felina Cordova-Marks. I'm an assistant professor at the College of Public Health, and I run this DigiWellbeing program with Billy Carson back there, who's a PhD student. So thank you everyone for being here, and I hope you have fun.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is obviously Mariah Gladstone, and I super appreciate you coming here today, especially with the other exciting activities happening in town at the same time. Believe me, I too am a little disappointed. So I am really excited to show you guys a recipe from the cookbook today. And also I brought some other indigenous foods to talk about, to show, maybe to taste if you guys want to try some little things. But ultimately, I just enjoy being here in your presence, and I'm really excited that you guys all took time to come today. So I, as was mentioned, I'm going to be demonstrating the recipe for the marinated steak and bell pepper roll-ups. It's super yummy, and it's a good way of kind of merging a good high protein but really colorful snack or meal, or however you want to prepare it, into something with relatively few ingredients, and obviously without needing a full kitchen to do. This is something that can be done on, I guess, a barbecue if you were outside. I know a lot of people love cooking on their Blackstones, especially when it's 1,000 degrees, which I know it often is in Tucson. But also something that kids can have a role in shaping and creating as well. So there'll be kind of an interactive part if you guys want to help make some of these roll-ups. You're welcome to do that, to shape them, or you can sit back and watch and just enjoy not having to cook. So I did start with some of this prep just because I got a few chunks of steak, and you can use anything. You can use wild game, of course, if you have deer meat or elk or something in the freezer from the last season. This is good for even the toughest roast because we're slicing it really thin. I went to the store and I got some little sirloin beef steaks, just so you guys are fully aware of what I'm using for this recipe. Back home, we have treaty rights to hunt just outside of Yellowstone National Park for buffalo. So I end up with a lot of buffalo meat that's wild harvested and obviously totally grass fed. So this is a good way of adding a lot of flavor, but also in a tender, yummy way. So what I'm doing with these steaks is just slicing them super thin. So we're gonna end up with pieces like this. And those are going to go into a marinade. So I'm going to use this bowl, and this is going to be my little marinade bowl. So this will marinate while I'm cutting bell peppers and onions and showing you guys some different things. And then we're going to saute the bell peppers and onions up so we have a little filling, assemble the roll-ups, and we'll finish up by cooking them on the grill. Makes sense? You guys tracking? Okay. So that's because I don't have a fridge where this can sit around in a marinade. We're winging this in a bookstore, which I love, but also shows you guys how easy this can be and how you can translate this to outside cooking as well. So what I have here is some apple cider vinegar. The cookbook has maple vinegar, but also apple cider vinegar is way easier to find than maple vinegar. I'm also not measuring this because we're winging it. the actual measurements are in the cookbook. But because I'm somewhere between tripling and quadrupling this recipe now is also why I'm being a little bit more vague with the ingredients. So this is some tomato paste, which is just concentrated tomato sauce. And as you guys probably know, tomatoes are a lovely indigenous food that, of course, then kind of got co-opted by Italy. They got brought over there. But they have their origins in the Americas with indigenous agricultural tradition. So we're bringing them back in to this marinade. I went to Italy and I was doing cooking demos, so of course I used tomatoes just to remind Italians where they came from. This may be a little passive aggressive of me. And I just have some regular black pepper and some salt as well. You can also, if you wanted this to be spicy, you could add a kick with this with some chile powder or some chipotle if you wanted some nice smokiness to this. And that really depends, especially since it's a kid's book. I didn't inherently make it spicy, but that would be easy to do. Also, you could add different types of peppers. I'm using bell peppers, they're sweet and yummy, but you can use spicier peppers depending on your own preferences and just add some of that kick into the mixture. And you guys know why we call peppers peppers? Do you know? Okay, you guys know Christopher Columbus. He discovered himself in the Americas and was a little lost, right? He thought, I'm in India, I'm looking for spices, and one of the spices he was looking for was pepper, black peppercorns, right? Which I guess they're kind of spicy if you're not someone that's super familiar with black pepper. Yeah, they're spicy. So he tried something that was spicy. Of course, it was a chile. And he was like, this is pepper because I'm in India where pepper is. So now all of our chiles are called peppers, even the ones that are, of course, not spicy, like bell peppers. So thanks, Columbus. Peppers and Indians have something in common. Okay, I also have some garlic powder here as well. So I'm just mixing up this little marinade here. Of course, I'm messy and stirring too aggressively, which is why I have an apron on. And I'm adding a little bit more of this, so it's a little bit more liquidy. I was getting a rental car, and the rental car person was asking why I'm in town. I was like, I'm doing a cooking demonstration. He's like, oh, I cook, but my wife bakes. And I was like, that's okay, that's true. There is a difference between cooking and baking, because cooking is more like this, where I'm like, yeah, ingredients, they're going in a bowl. And baking is like the baking can sense your fear. Like, don't blink. The baking will know if you get your ingredients slightly wrong. So,
Mariah,
yes,
I have a question for you.
yes.
What, you've been here before, I've known you for a while, being able to cook. We've, variety of recipes. So why a children's cookbook instead of a cookbook for adults?
Well, to be fair, I would argue this is also a cookbook for adults, but I think that in the realm of indigenous foods, there is fortunately a lot more materials that we're seeing featuring recipes that are made for adults, right? Fancy food, beautifully plated food. But I was really lucky that I grew up cooking, and I grew up with a little garden and with my grandma coming out, and we got to go out and gather and pick berries and go look for mushrooms and things like that. And so I got to see the magic of seeds turning into plants, turning into things that I would gather from my garden and then bring inside, and got to see my parents turn into food got to help bake a ton of different things. My mom knew that I would learn fractions if I learned how to double recipes. So, oh wow, we have 6 overripe bananas instead of 3 like the recipe calls for. Now we have to double everything. And it was very Montessori method, right? Hands-on fractions and multiplying or halving, and that obviously turned into an engineering degree that I don't use. But it also meant that I got that unique experience of getting to play around in the kitchen. I have recipes written in marker from when I was 4 years old, and getting to experience all those things was something that was really important to me, because you can't opt out of eating, right? So it certainly helps when you're able to cook and you're able to really have an understanding of the ways that food comes from the land. And I think that that's important for everybody at any age to experience. But I think that there just needs to be more materials for kids about food and about the foods that come from the land and how we can work with them. So this was important to me because of that reason. And also I still have the cookbooks from when I was a little kid that are saved and on my shelf. And I think my dad took one of my recipes, one of my kids' cookbook, it was like for pancakes, and he multiplied it by 12 and he wrote on my book, which is something I would have never done as a child, but not my dad did. So I still have my dad's writing in my little kid's cookbook from him multiplying those recipes out. So, you know, it's something that was really important to me growing up, and I wanted to create something that would be useful for kids at any age, but would also grow with them and be something that kids could bring into adulthood. And also, you know, recipes that are kid friendly, right? That kids would want to eat. And also we're healthy, and that kids could have a role in helping to prepare no matter what stage they were at, age-wise or cooking experience-wise. This part is not the kid-friendly. This part is the aggressive knife part. And a lot of this comes down to how thinly you are slicing these pieces of meat. Because the thinner you slice them, the faster they're going to cook and the more tender they're going to be. If you have one of those cool meat slicers, you can semi-freeze a roast and then you can slice it from there. But I just found this at the store. The other thing you can also do, which is a kid-friendly task, is to put something like this in a Ziploc bag and then let the kids hit that with a hammer to smash it. Like a nice rubber mallet or something, right? So you can get pieces, even if you're not slicing up super thin, you can get them to be nice and thin for rolling them up. And depending on where your tribal nation is from, you might have different recipes for dry meat. Dry meat is, of course, the way that almost all of our people preserved our meat and our game. And that was because, especially here, even in Montana, we have really dry air. And so we don't have to worry about the humidity in the air getting into our food and turning that into something that's going to go rotten. But you can air dry meat just in your living room, which is actually what we do. We hang strings across our ceiling and we'll slice our deer meat and our elk meat really, really thin. And then we hang up those pieces of meat. And we have a wood stove going. So this is after hunting season in the middle of winter. And that kind of circulates. It's basically like a big dehydrator. And that meat will turn into these crispy pieces of meat, which they're dry enough that I could snap these with my fingers, right? But that saves a lot of space in my freezer, I'll say that. But it's like jerky. It's like really dry jerky. And so, you know, traditionally people would save their whole animals like that by saving it as dry meat. And then of course you can rehydrate that in soups and stews and things like that. Or you can grind that dry meat down into almost like a meat dust. You can put it in a blender and blend it like that until it's almost a powder. And then you can mix it with dried berries or dried fruits and a little bit of tallow. And tallow is, of course, the fat from an animal, solid at room temperature. And it's kind of white, looks like lard, right? So lard is from pigs. Tallow is more from cows or bison or deer or moose or larger game animals like that. And you mix those things together, dried berries, dried meat, and that tallow. And then you get basically all of your macros in one little super high protein, high fat, kind of sweet because of those berries, little snack cake. And those have a shelf life of a very, very long time because everything's so dried out in them. But they also have a ton of calories for folks that are going to be out hunting and running long distances. And they need that energy that's packed into very light, packable bites. So that's called pemmican. I think pemmican actually comes from a Cree word. We have different words and different languages for it, but that was something that was really common a little bit farther north. Pemmican is kind of a fun thing to make. I did a little pemmican cooking class with a preschool back home because you get to take a blender and blend all your ingredients, and then it's kind of like when you start assembling these little balls of pemmican, it's almost like shaping Play-Doh, even though you're working with meat berries. A whole bunch of very unusual shaped things here happening. Found these cute little steaks. They're gonna work out really well for us. I figured we wouldn't have a super large crowd today, so it meant that I was like, we're gonna try giving everyone a bite. That's what we're gonna try to do with this.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
So the empanadas, how were they like incorporate into your culture, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I'm Blackfeet, grew up on the Blackfeet reservation, but my mom's actually Cherokee and she's enrolled Cherokee. And so that process of that corn flour and making corn into different ingredients, it's really important to Cherokee people. So we had Selu, which is our corn goddess. And my mom, when I grew up, even in Montana, she always said no self-respecting Cherokee would ever plant a garden without corn. And for me, I was like, okay, mom, that's pretty hardcore, right? And then I got my seeds from the Cherokee Nation seed bank, and it says on my little corn packet, no self-respecting Cherokee would ever plant a garden without corn. Cherokee proverb. I'm like, oh, okay. It wasn't just my mom being intense. And so I always had corn, even in Montana, which you gotta be pretty creative sometimes with our growing seasons. But that making of the corn flour, what we would have a lot of times in Cherokee culture was what we called a bean bread. So it was a mixture of that masa with cooked beans, and then they were wrapped in the corn husks, and then they were boiled in water. And so what I wanted to do was kind of actually merge both my Cherokee ancestry with my Blackfeet ancestry, and I wanted to fill empanadas, which is of course a classically indigenous food, more common down south and with people indigenous to Central America. But I wanted to merge my Blackfeet foods like bison with my Cherokee foods like corn and make something that was super easy, but with both of those sides. So it's definitely a modern take on empanadas, but with foods that are brought to both sides of my family. Yeah.
Did you go hunting too?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, I'm a bow hunter. That is in part because my partner is a wrestling coach and bow season comes before wrestling season. So we're able to get out before the season starts and hopefully have meat in the freezer before then. But also I think that there's that fun in bow hunting. And I think it really forces you to be in touch with everything and to really listen and track. And that's more my style of hunting. And then it's almost time for the fish to start spawning. So I want to get out there and get a whole bunch of trout as well this year. So just different seasons. So what the freezer is filled with, that's for sure.
So, all right, I have another question.
Yes, of
Just,
course.
Looking at your book,
Yes.
and I always wonder about this. My wife and I love to cook, but we have a 2.5-year-old.
Yes.
So I was wondering about, what are the types of things that, different age ranges can do to help you in the kitchen, or, eventually when they can make something on their own.
Yeah. And that depends so much on the kid. Of course, parents know their own kids best in terms of what they're able to give them. I was talking to an immersion school in Pablo, and they said, our kids are always helping us with our bison harvests because they're a little immersion school, and they will go out and harvest a buffalo from their tribal herd. And they say, our kids as young as 5 can help butcher a buffalo. And they're very comfortable with their knife skills. Okay, if you guys, okay. But also some parents are like, I have a 10-year-old that I do not trust with a steak knife. Like, that is on you. It very much depends. But there are so many things, especially in terms of shaping and decorating, that really young kids, like a 2.5-year-old, love to do, right? And that is things like spooning jelly into cookies. That is things like making these roll-ups, where we're going to take this and wrap it around something and put a toothpick in it, right? That is something that kids can learn fine motor skills from, and the chance of anyone getting hurt is very, very, very low. Yes, you could get stabbed with a toothpick, but don't do that. But there's also, tasks as kids get older. I think kids first learn to bake before they learn to fry things on a hot skillet, right? Which is why I wanted to do a baked empanada recipe, just because it's something that kids can have fun assembling. They can be baked. If they fall apart, then that's fine, because they're in the oven, they're on a sheet pan, and it's not the frying process that is so common with empanadas. And also, it's a little bit healthier nutritionally, but it's something that kids can have that role in shaping. And so that really depends so much on what the parents feel is appropriate for the kids. I had definitely some of my friends look the book over, and I was like, is that something that your kid at this age is really comfortable with? And so I tried to have ideas for what part kids could do, whether it was something the kids could cook the whole recipe for. And also, the more a kid cooks, the more comfortable they're going to get cooking, right? So being in those spaces is going to just definitely improve the skills and their comfort level and what they're able to do. I have this is gonna sit here and soak a little bit. I'm gonna put a little bit more salt in here because I didn't salt a ton when I made that marinade. For folks that work with steak or red meat a lot, salting will draw the moisture out of it, which will help it cook more evenly. So just mixing that into here. If you're doing steaks on the grill, salt it, then you dab it with a paper towel so it gets that moisture, and then it will cook nicely with that good sear. So that's what we're going to be doing in a little bit. But I wanted to show you guys some fun things that I brought from home. And we can pass some of these around if you guys want to see. So I brought dry meat. This dry meat is here. And then this is something kind of similar. We have choke cherries back home. So choke cherries are common in a lot of the Great Plains. They are interesting because if you look them up in I'll make it easier for you. If you look them up in a plant identification textbook, it will, or plant identification book, it will say, be really careful. The pits have hydrocyanic acid in them, basically cyanide, right? They're poisonous. Don't eat the pits. Well, Blackfeet people, Lakota people, other Plains people would pound the whole berry down with the pits included. and then dehydrate them. Well, that drying process neutralizes the hydrocyanic acid, but it leaves that lovely almond flavor in there. So it's something really cool. There's hard parts of pits that are in this, but it also makes the choke cherries a lot sweeter by dehydrating them. Then from here, you could either grind this into a powder, mix it with the dry meat, and make things like the pemmican I was talking about, or you can rehydrate this by adding water and simmering it on the stove, and you can make this sweet choke cherry pudding. So it's a way of turning a berry that is pretty hard, bitter even by itself, into something that is sweet and delicious. And there's actually research, there was a student that heard that choke cherries have medicinal properties. So she did a research project when she got to college that was actually making choke cherry pudding the traditional way with the pits, or the way that a lot of people make it by straining out the pits and then making the choke cherry pudding that way. And then she used that choke cherry pudding on cancer cells. And what she found was that the choke cherry pudding made with the pits slowed and stopped the growth of the cancer cells, but the ones made with the pits strained out and not incorporated into the mixture didn't have any effect on the cancer cells, and they continued to grow. So that was pretty cool, I think, in terms of research. So poisonous, yes, under certain cases, but with a little bit of indigenous knowledge about how to work with things, potentially medicinal and potentially really helpful and delicious. Speaking of berries, I tried bringing some things that are not like your typical berries that you can find in the store. All blueberries originated in North America. Raspberries, of course, we have native to North America. We also have other rubus genus things like thimbleberries, salmon berries, blackberries. You know that compound berry shape that looks like a raspberry? There are no poisonous compound berries in North America. So no matter where you travel on the continent, those compound berry shapes will always be edible and delicious as well. So if you're in Washington or Oregon, they have some different types of cloudberries and salmon berries and things there. Something probably doesn't look exactly like you'd find a raspberry in a grocery store, but still edible. These on the other hand are juniper berries. You guys know juniper berries? I figured. So juniper berries are kind of interesting. You guys are welcome to actually try one of these if you want to, if you've never had a juniper berry. Junipers, of course, grow all across the Southwest, and you can turn them into tea by taking the green parts and simmering that down. The wood ashes of juniper have been used in cooking. They are used to mix as a seasoning or a flavoring into things like blue corn mush. But also you can use those wood ashes and they raise the pH of that water bath that you add them to. So they make acids and bases for making them highly alkaline, and that removes the hull of the corn. So if you cook whole corn in that wood ash and water mixture, it will remove the hull of the corn, but it also helps the bound niacin turn into free niacin. Very, very complicated. Just makes the corn way more digestible to our bodies, especially when it goes from dried corn, which will break your teeth, to nice soft hominy, which is digestible. You can get the nutrients out of. It's sweet. If you make it with wood ashes, it's smoky too, and has that lovely smoke flavor. And wood ashes add a ton of calcium. Junipers have a lot of really cool uses. But the berries themselves are also edible and make kind of a yummy seasoning. They're a little bit sweet. They're a little bit peppery. Yeah, we call them spicy. But they're also that unique piney flavor that you get from conifers. So it's a really interesting seasoning. I will like pounding these down in like a mortar and pestle and turning them into like a rub for roasts or things like that. But some people will say if you're out in the desert and your mouth's getting really dry and you're trying to hike and you make it back to your car or whatever and you ran out of water, if you chew up a juniper berry, it kind of makes your mouth feel wet again. So kind of an interesting use for juniper berries besides all of the food ones I just told you. But if you do, you can try one of these. Cosmetic stuff, maybe, I'm not sure about that, but if you know uses, I'd love to share them. Yeah, I don't know if anyone knows of junipers being used in cosmetic stuff, let me know. Yeah.
Have you heard of aloe being used as?
Yeah, tallow makes great skincare. So, yeah. Yeah, my mom swears by tallow now. She's like, this is my go-to moisturizer, in part because it's basically like. It's very similar to the oils that your body makes because it's an animal fat. And so it won't make your skin too greasy. It'll help moisturize, but also just without clogging your pores. So one of my go-to skincare things is actually, you guys know rose hips, like from Wild Roses, or domesticated roses, they all have rose hips. Rose hips are really high in vitamin C. So you can make a rose hip oil with the tallow, and it'll draw that vitamin C into the tallow. And vitamin C is, of course, a great skincare thing. And so it's like a rose hip oil tallow balm. And you can make, I mean, you can. I know the last time I was at Natural Grocers, they even sold like bison tallow, but you could get grass-fed beef tallow or other things, and you can experiment and make your own with that too. If cool cosmetic things is more your style. Of course, a couple of seeds. Actually, this is really hard to see because it's dried out. You guys know what this is? It's sunflower. Yeah, so you guys have probably heard of the Three Sisters before. Okay, that's like Indigenous Ag 101, right? Which is corn, beans, and squash. Lots of different tribes had corn, beans, and squash, all the way from the Northeast in like present day New York area. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy had their version of the Three Sisters. Into the Southeast, you have all the tribes that farm through there. The Midwest, of course, the Southwest, there are different varieties of corn, beans, and squash, and then into Central and South America, right? That's very, very common. And of course, the different climate that you live in has a big difference in the varieties that you're going to grow of corn and beans and squash. But if you look at some gardens, even around here, people domesticated sunflowers and bred wild sunflowers into varieties that had bigger and bigger edible seeds, right? This is actually the Suffolk variety. And this was bred to have really black seeds so that the seeds and the shells of the seeds could be used to make dye for clothing. So this is, I actually managed to grow this in my garden in Montana, which was pretty impressive for about a 90-day growing season. It did snow on this guy in May, and I covered it up with like a milk jug. And I was like, you're gonna be okay, because it was just a little guy at that point. I was like, I don't know why I planted you. It's snowing, a foot of snow in May 20th. And then eventually I was like, it's been snowing too long. It's not getting enough air. I have to take the milk jug off. I'm like, I'll just replant my sunflowers. Sunflowers are really tough. And so it ended up with about a foot of snow on it. Survived as a little baby seedling and grew into a big sunflower seed head that I can now show you guys in demos. So I'll pass this around. And then of course, you guys know sunflower seeds. These are just raw sunflower seeds. You guys can find these in any store. But raw sunflower seeds will turn into a really delicious flour. It's what is used to make one of the cookie recipes in the back of the book. If you grind up these sunflower seeds in a coffee grinder or a food processor or a, you can put them in a plastic bag and hit them with a hammer until they're dust. That also works. But if you grind them into a flour and then add enough maple syrup so that they'll stick together, you can make a really yummy cookie dough. One of my friends did a traditional food diet study, and she was trying to figure out a pie crust recipe because she was cooking for Thanksgiving and she wanted to make a pie crust for her family using only indigenous ingredients. So I gave her the cookie recipe and she pressed that into the bottom of a pie tin and then used sweet potatoes and made herself a little pie with this as a pie crust. So super easy. And also I do a lot of cooking demos in schools, and a lot of the times you're not allowed to bring peanuts or other tree nuts into the schools. So it's really helpful when you can use sunflower seeds because not a lot of kids have allergies to these. So that's from here. This is my own sunflower. This is one. That was one I bought with the shells already taken off. If you do decide to make that cookie recipe, just be really aware that you want the sunflower seeds to be raw. And that's because they still have the oils in them. Once they get roasted, the oils bake out of the sunflower seeds, and then you lose the oils that help the cookie dough stick together. So that's my only caution about that one. Similarly, pumpkin seeds, you guys will see a lot of pepitas recipes and pumpkin seed flour featured throughout the book. And that's because pumpkin seeds are awesome. So I didn't know, actually, when I first started using pumpkin seeds and so much cooking and pepitas, that they're from a couple of varieties of squash that actually grow without shells. So they grow cool and naked like this. You don't have to take the shells off of all the pumpkin seeds. They just grow like that inside the squashes. So they're not truly pumpkin seeds. They're more like calabaza seeds in the big umbrella of squashes sense, if that makes sense. Again, food processor, coffee grinder, you can turn them into flour. And they have that same heaviness and consistency of something like almond flour. So you guys know macarons? Those like very challenging to make egg white cookies. So they use almond flour, right? And for people that are allergic to almonds, they're always like, what's the substitute? The only substitute that I've ever found for that almond flour is pumpkin seed flour, because it has that really, really similar consistency. So still challenging to make because of all of the measurements and things by weight, but it is a really cool ingredient because I've made brownies with it. There's a pizza crust recipe with pumpkin seed flour. Yeah.
So I can ask a question.
Yeah.
I have a little brother, he's allergic to squash.
He's allergic to squash.
Yeah,
Oh.
only some of them.
Yeah.
So,
Is he allergic to almonds? You could do a substitute for almond flour. It's not indigenous, but it will substitute back and forth in recipes. Just because it has that similar like heaviness, but it's also very high protein and dense, and so it bakes in the same way.
that could be an alternative.
Yeah, yeah. But most recipes don't have pumpkin seed flour. And then if he's allergic to, I mean, obviously he's allergic to like squash flesh, like like pureed pumpkin and stuff. Sweet potatoes taste almost exactly like a lot of pureed pumpkin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or he just has to miss out. My brother swore he hated sweet potatoes, and then I started substituting. I was like using pumpkin in certain recipes instead of sweet potatoes, because to me it tasted the exact same. If you roast a pumpkin, it's nice and soft like a sweet potato. So I was like, oh, it's made of pumpkin instead. And then he would eat it. And then eventually I just started putting the sweet potatoes back in the recipe and not telling him, and he never noticed. So I think he secretly does like sweet potatoes, but that's a different issue. But yeah, actual roasted squash, like a winter squash, substitutes pretty easily for sweet potatoes. If he doesn't have any good sensitivities to sweet potatoes, that's what I would say. Yeah, yeah. I'll have to think of a good substitute for this because this is so much zucchini from my garden. If you guys grow zucchini or summer squash in your garden, you probably know that there's like a week and a half, maybe a couple weeks where you just have a ton of zucchini. And then suddenly everyone's like locking their car doors so that their neighbors don't put zucchinis in the front seat when they're not looking, and that kind of thing. Maybe that's just my friends. The way that a lot of people, a lot of traditional tribes that harvested winter or summer squash, like zucchini or yellow squash or those little patty pans, they would dehydrate them. Again, great when you live in a dry climate, because you can take squash and you can slice it really thin, and then you can dry it out. And then from here, you can of course add it to soups and stews and things like that. Or when you dry it, you add like a seasoning salt, and then you dry it till it's nice and crispy, you get chips. Right, and then you can eat little squash chips. So I will say that if you live in anywhere with a little bit of moisture, so maybe the rainy season around here, if you're gonna do this, add like one of those moisture absorber packets to where you store it. Because if they start absorbing any moisture from the air, then they'll get moldy. Or you can take this and then you can grind it into flour and you can get zucchini flour. And zucchini flour has a really similar consistency to coconut flour. Like it's really fine and it absorbs a ton of moisture. So any recipe that calls for coconut flour, you can 1-for-1 substitute zucchini flour if that's what you have on hand. There's a whole bunch of ways to deal with extra zucchini, but this is one.
What's your go-to hydration method? Do you get a machine or?
Yeah, so my go-to is if I'm doing a small quantity, I do have a little countertop machine. That's fast and I can control the temperature of it. But if I'm doing dry meat, I will hang it up over my stove. But that's also if I have my wood stove going, which is only certain times of the year. We don't have air conditioning in our houses in Montana, so sometimes I'm just like, it's 85 degrees in my house. I guess I can dehydrate things at home. But I tend to dehydrate things out of the sun. There are certain things like I don't have any up here. Like berries, like the choke cherry patties or something. That I can sun dry, and that speeds up the process. Some more sun-dried tomatoes make things dry out so fast in the sun with a little breeze blowing. That is, I mean, what if we turn our dehydrators up to about 120 degrees? That's about what a lot of people's sun wears. Yeah, I was like, that is what the air is in certain places, and that's above my wood stove. That's kind of what it is in the winter, right? So, there's just, I don't have a set process. It kind of depends on the time of the year and what exactly I'm drying out. But if I have to dehydrate things like berries in the middle of winter, I'll definitely use my countertop machine just because they have more moisture. So there's different things like that. That would be, I'll mention one other method, which is if you're drying plants out, like for teas. So I don't know if you guys have yarrow here at all. You guys familiar with yarrow? Okay, so yarrow is a plant that grows across a lot of the plains. I know they have it in the mountains in the northern part of the state, but yarrow, its scientific name is Achillea millefolium. Kind of has these little ferny looking leaves. And it comes from stories that say Achilles used to take it with him into battle. Blackfeet warriors used to take it with us in the battle too, because if you chew up the leaves and you put it on a wound, it'll stop you from bleeding, which is pretty cool. So one time someone asked me what the compound was that stops the bleeding, and they said it's Achillea, which is actually the scientific name that they gave the compound, which is named after the plant, which is named after the Greek hero, because it's a native plant to the whole northern hemisphere. It also tastes like tarragon, so you can use it in your spice cabinet and things like that. But you can also use it to make tea. So this is some that came from my garden. This is the flower, but you can use the leaves and stuff as well. And I will harvest a lot of plants to turn into teas. And when I harvest those plants, I'll cut them typically above the ground. If you have mint in the garden, if you have raspberry leaves or something like that, if there's something that you're drying out that is more of a like herbaceous plant, then I will tie those things up and hang them upside down in a dark space and just like wait until they're air dried to the point of being crispy. And that's just, they don't have a ton of moisture in their leaves already. And so they tend to dry out. And if I dry them in a dark place, the plants don't try to keep on living, right? If you dry them in the sun, a lot of the flavor burns off in the sunlight and the plants will try to keep living, and the flavor and as oils in the plants won't be as potent and delicious. So I'll just show you guys a little yarrow flower stash. Okay, I'll show you guys one last thing. You guys know sumac? Okay, so you're probably familiar with sumac. So this is some sumac powder. The berries, those little cute little tart red berries, And there's like a certain time of the year where you harvest the sumac, right? Because you wait for those berries to be perfectly tart. If you miss your window, the birds might get 'em. So sumac is a really cool spice. It tastes lemony, which is great if you live in a place like I do where we have sumac, but lemons don't grow. But sumac is really, of course, a delicious spice that's used throughout the Southwest. I know Navajo Nation Farm sells sumac. They don't sell it online, of course, so I got some of my friends on the nation to go and buy a bag and send it to me in Montana. But sumac is cool, and it's like, I like using it on fish as a seasoning because it adds that lemony flavor. It's like adding a lemon pepper, pepper to the outside of the fish. So you can use that as a seasoning. You can mix it into water. And then if you wanted, you could add a sweetener like agave and make a lemonade, basically. But with the sumac, I have been experimenting with it because I want to make an anti-lemon lemon bar recipe without lemon, but with sumac instead. And I just have to get it to. What happened is I made a lovely shortbread out of pumpkin seed flour, and then I didn't wait for it to cool before I added my liquid sumac, and all the crust came up when I poured the top of my lemon bars. Anyway, I have to revisit that. I got very frustrated. It was delicious, but it was not 2 separate layers, so I got upset. I will revisit it later. But if you guys want, if you've never tried sumac, sprinkle a little bit into your hands and try it. It's kind of like, I don't know, I think it tastes like the outside of a sour Skittle situation. Not quite that intense, but welcome to try it. All right, I think that's it for my show and tell things that I brought for you guys. And I know that I brought a ton of things that are kind of Montana, not super Arizona, but what am I gonna do? Come here and lecture you guys about Arizona things? I guess I could try, but we might all feel a little awkward. So I'm gonna cut up these bell peppers. These are the bell peppers that they had. So I'm gonna use these smaller ones, and I'm gonna cut this onion into thin little strips as well. I know that some people don't like onion. If you are assembling your little strips or your little roll-ups, and you don't want onion in them, leave the onion out. That is a very easy solution. You could make it your own. You'll also notice that I try to put a lot of substitutions in the cookbook as well. I want things to be really accessible to people. And there's not too many recipes where you need every single thing all the time, especially with cooking. You can kind of make cooking your own. I'm going to put on more gloves. With baking, it's a little bit more specific. Cooking is just turning it into what you want. I really like these cool little biodegradable gloves. You will see that. Makes me feel less guilty about the white shirt on the gloves. Okay, I'm gonna do this so you guys can see. Oh, this knife is so small. Which is my own fault. Okay. Do you guys have any other questions while we're chilling? Well, I'm cutting. I can answer questions while I'm cutting.
So I have a question. You mentioned that buffalo are for the protein.
Yeah.
We don't have buffalo down here in Arizona.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, butchering is kind of like market.
Interesting. So the question was about butchering being guarded knowledge. And I know, so it's interesting. Where I live is actually one of the most rural places on my reservation. It's a really, really, really small community. But on my street, there's a woman that lives there and she operates a little butcher shop. And I talked to her about it one time and she was like, it's really my dream just to have a whole team of female butchers. And she goes, that's because butchering is a woman's job, right? So she had really strong opinions, but she also trained a ton of guys. And she learned from her dad, who was the butcher at the local IGA, right, a little grocery store. So she incorporated a lot of kind of commercial knowledge with traditional knowledge. And something she did, because she's not actually USDA certified, I think she has a custom certification, which is what like wild game processors and stuff have. But she'll give away different parts of the animals, like the guts, the sweetbreads, things like that, that she's not able to sell. And a lot of the people that pay her to butcher their animals don't always want. And so she'll give those away for elders. But in terms of like actual protected knowledge, people seem really interested in actually sharing that. And there's been a lot more classes that I've seen lately on just how to break down an animal or how to field dress an animal. And some of those are led by people that run butcher shops. And that's in part because they want people that have really safe practices out in the field. But also they end up having a lot more work than they have time for. So they just want a community that is butchering safely. And so I like seeing that because in a community where we were so disconnected from our traditional foods for so long, I appreciate seeing that people are sharing that so openly. The other thing that people are doing a lot more classes of is hide tanning and working with those hides, because they've been treated as kind of scrap material or waste products for so long, because a lot of hunters don't know how to use them. And so I like seeing that. But I know Navajo Nation has like really specific things in terms of how to break down sheep and do that. And we don't have similar protocols in that way. But I can tell you that it's being shared more openly by the folks that have that knowledge. And one of our local food pantries, they'll buy buffalo from both our tribal herd and a native ranch that owns buffalo. And when they do that, they will bring either that female butcher out from her butcher shop to help do the field harvest, and they'll invite kids from all the schools, and any school that can come and, make the little 15-minute bus ride up. All the kids get to see the organs of the animal. They get to hold those. The owner of the ranch, I saw him put his mouth on the lungs of the buffalo that they harvested one time and blow them up, and they're like 7 feet across when they're fully inflated. It's crazy. But the fact that almost all the elementary school kids on my res have seen buffalo harvested at one point or another, and they get to see like, this is the first stomach, this is the second stomach, and they get to touch those things and hold the heart. And I've seen little elementary school kids bite raw kidneys because someone said it's traditional, you got to take a bite of the raw kidney. So that's really, really special, I think. But it also means that those kids are more willing to eat those foods in the future because they've gotten to see the whole process and feel really connected with it. That was a really long answer. I'm not sure I answered the question.
I appreciate that. That's awesome. I feel like just sharing that it brings back the exposure to children, and it's planting that seed of where they come from. Like you said, we're so disconnected from our tribal roots that when they have that exposure so young, they know that this is their food diet.
Yeah.
So that's something.
I helped lead a hide tanning workshop at our alternative high school. And it was interesting because we had bison chili one day, we had bison lasagna the next day. Like, we incorporated that food from the animal, that hide we were working on for the whole week that we were working on this hide. And it was interesting because these kids were more willing to get involved with hide, and they were more willing to try the food because they kind of saw this whole relationship. And that was really cool, especially for the alternative school, which were a whole bunch of kids that had kind of been labeled bad kids. And they got to really do something hands-on that was working with food from the land They knew the rancher where the food had come from, and that was something that was really cool to be able to connect, so. More bison and meat processing classes for kids. Well, that's always cool. When I spoke to this immersion school, it was actually over on the Flathead Reservation, so it wasn't my reservation, but I spoke to this immersion school. Their culinary director, I think he kind of worked in commercial kitchens for a long time, and then he started working at this little elementary school. I think they only had 80 kids, like K-8, and he said, yeah, some of those kids, it was really cold this winter and they didn't want to be outside on the playground before school, so they would just come in and help me prep food for cafeteria. And they just thought that was better than being outside in the cold. So he goes, but it's so cool because then we'll go on camping trips and we'll catch a ton of fish, and then we skewered those fish so we could cook them right on the open fire, and kind of have the it's like a cool way of holding the fish on fillets like upright. So they did that, and then they were making bison mac and cheese. But I thought it was so cool that he was like, yeah, they went out and helped harvest a buffalo, and all those kids that are 5 years old, they can handle a knife and cut a buffalo and break it down. And I'm like, a 5-year-old is like smaller than a buffalo's stomach. Like, I guess if you hold it open for them, they can probably figure it out. But I was just laughing because he was really confident in these kids' ability to work with traditional foods and identify plants. And I was like, that's the type of stuff that I'm glad the immersion schools are focusing on, and not just language. Language is so important, but they're using language as a tool to teach cooking classes and to work with traditional foods outside. That was even more special. So I love these tiny bell peppers, but they're so tedious to cut sometimes.
We have a lady here, her name is Rachel,
Okay,
and she actually does cooking classes over there at it's on Indian Center.
cool.
The last time she tried to, well, I only went to one of her classes, but she tried to give me a blue corn atole,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
how to make us a dessert. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Trying to bring back some tradition here too.
Yeah.
It's a community.
That's really cool. And I love seeing how many folks are working in the native food world, and like there are so many cool chefs and producers and folks that are operating in that space now. So it's cool because now it's not just indigenous food, it's everyone has kind of their own kind of niche space, and people do different things. And also, I have a ton of mentors that I get to learn from. If I don't know the answer to something, there are different chefs that I can send a text or a Facebook message to or something, and I can get answers on all these different questions about foods from their people and their home communities, and where can I get this? And it's really cool. I just I was talking about wood ashes a second ago. There's a woman on the Oneida Reservation in Wisconsin, and her family produces a lot of hardwood ash. They'll intentionally burn hardwood ash for use in cooking, right? So they'll sift it, and they'll make sure that people have, because that's how they make hominy with their corn there. And she was like, does anyone need hardwood ash? And I sent her a message. I was like, actually, yeah, because I live in Montana and I don't have hardwood ash. And if I am burning things, sometimes I'll put like old cereal boxes or something in the wood stove. Well, that's coated in plastic. I don't want those ashes in my food, right? So I was like, I know that she has this really good ash. So I was like, I will send you deer dry meat in exchange for some wood ashes. So it was really cool because we each got to priority box the little package to each other. And I was like, this is traditional trade. Like this is where it's at. Dry meat and wood ashes sent through the mail. Anyways, because that's what I needed and that's what she wanted. So it was something really cool. I was like, even things like that, those trade route connections. I have a friend down here that sent me prickly pear jam. Right? We have prickly pears in Montana, but they're like the itty teeny tiny ones that are just like you watch for when you're walking around on the plains because they're shorter than the grass, and you'll just stub your toe on it. It's a sharp little guy. They are not the cool large ones here that produce delicious fruits, quite the same quantity. They're just little baby ones, so. But that's why I'm like, oh, there's so many cool desert plants down here. And then like saguaro seeds and using those. I want to make a muffin recipe, saguaro seeds, you know, like using them like poppy seed muffins, saguaro seed muffins. I have a whole bunch of ideas in my head, but I actually have to make a recipe and then test it a whole bunch of times. So I haven't done that one yet either.
I didn't know what the was. Were they edible?
Yeah. Yeah, you can use them in salad dressings and stuff too.
Oh,
They have them at the co-op. On the
Concord Avenue.
At the res.
I like the red.
Yeah. So I went down there. I was able to find some. And then, you know, of course, mesquite flour and cooking with mesquite flour. There's just getting so tired of cutting up these little baby bell peppers that I'm about ready to call it. It's always the cutting that takes a while. And if you have a big bell pepper, this would have been solved with like 2 bell peppers. So don't get discouraged by watching me cut up on my baby bell peppers either. Okay.
What do you hunt?
What do I hunt? I hunt for a lot of elk because elk are cool, and in bow season you can call the elk in by mimicking. If you mimic a bull elk, you might call another bull elk in, or you can mimic a cow elk. So then they'll get interested and they'll come check you out, which makes hunting in some ways easier, in some ways kind of scary. So then you have a bull elk running at you, think it's gonna fight another bull elk. So, but sorry, thinking this up. Okay, but then sometimes I'll hit deer, and if the buffalo come out of Yellowstone, then I'm able to go and try to get a buffalo. There's like a very small place of like state land where we and about 13 other tribes have treaty rights. And it's a very interesting situation, especially since Yellowstone ends up capturing a lot of the buffalo right when they leave the park to relocate, but also they call them, which is confusing. If you're like, we could call them, eat them. So there's kind of some interesting politics that happen in our little treaty right zone. And then it's our tribal game wardens that enforce it, even though it's about 6 hours outside of a reservation. So that's kind of some complicated relationships there. And then there's tribal game wardens from 13 other tribes as well. And then there's the state livestock inspector, because they're always concerned about brucellosis, and it's very, very complicated. This is definitely one of those things that have to be smarter than the cooking one. Haha, okay. Okay.
Do you have a favorite recipe for your cookbook?
I don't. That really depends on what I'm in the mood for. I will say that I end up making breakfast tacos a lot, just because they're so easy to make and assemble, and you can kind of make them with whatever you have. you know, I've added seasonings to bison burger or deer burger before, and just kind of made like a little breakfast sausage with my burger. So that's really easy, and then, you know, you can just add different ingredients to little breakfast tacos with scrambled eggs, so. I will end up making those a lot, and then I end up making a lot of. I make dark chocolate pumpkin seed brownies a ton because they're really easy, but I make them a lot for catering events because they are dairy free, gluten free, they're sweetened with maple syrup. They're entirely vegan. So for any catering event that I do, people are like, well, can I eat this? And I haven't found anyone with food restrictions that can't eat those. Even people that tend to avoid sugar will eat them because they're sweetened with a little bit of maple syrup, but there's no other sweetener in them. And, you know, generally people that are trying to avoid sugar are fine with a little, you know, a tablespoon of maple syrup in a brownie that's otherwise made of really high protein flour. So I end up making those a lot and I like them. I think they're really good. I even got I had some middle school students help me with a catering event that I needed to have like plated meals for. And even the middle school students, I mean, they were obsessed with them and they went home and told their grandparents, we have to make these. And plus they're really good with raspberries on top. Or like make a full raspberry sauce for the dark chocolate brownies. That's like my go-to. I don't know if it's my favorite, but I do end up making that a lot. Also, I use the avocado oil spray. You can use whatever cooking oil you want. But I figured avocado oil has a really high smoke point, so it's good for frying things. Or you can use it. You can use it in baking because it's pretty neutral oil. You know, it doesn't have as strong of a taste as olive oil, for example. And it's pretty easy to find. I feel like a couple years ago, avocado oil was a little bit more difficult to find. But it also has pretty good fats in it. What's that?
It smells good.
Yeah. Yeah, I want these, especially my onions, I want them nice and bendy. But they're gonna be the filling for our little steak roll-ups here. And you can add green bell peppers. You could put like wilted spinach or wild greens or something in here as well. You can get pretty creative with this filling if you want to. As I said, you could add jalapenos. You could add different types of increasingly spicier chiles, depending on how spicy you want them to. Yeah.
Oh, I would just still, I'm very interested with like your is there a way like how you respect the animal?
Yeah.
And that play a big important.
Yeah, so the question was about respecting the animal during hunting practices, and I think anytime you take an animal, even if it's, you know, an animal that you raised or something like that, and of course for Blackfeet people and for so many native tribes, we have a practice of putting down tobacco kind of as an offering and thanking the animal for giving its life. But the other part of that is just making sure that you're using all the parts of the animal. And when we harvest an animal in a traditional way, you know, we're using all of the guts and the organs and all of that. And the only thing that's left is basically the contents of that animal's stomach and intestines. That's what we'll leave on the ground, and everything else will come with us. And that will all become different ingredients or different tools, or, you know, we'll end up using like the bones. We'll cut the bones and we'll roast them, and then we'll make bone broth out of those. And then you skim, when you cut the bones open to make bone broth, they're filled with tallow, or sorry, marrow. And then that tallow that's in the marrow, that really fatty part, that's some people love eating the marrow out of bones, right? But when you simmer them into bone broth, you can scoop that fat off the top of it, kind of like a layer of oil, and then you strain it and it ends up as a cooking oil. Or ends up as that skincare balm or whatever, right? And so that's something that my cousins will do and make sure that they use all the bones of the animals too. And they'll make bone broth and then they'll simmer the bone broth down so it's really concentrated, and then they freeze it in little ice cube trays. So when they want to use bone broth, they'll take an ice cube out, add some water to it, and melt the ice cube and basically reconstitute it. So they have a whole process for utilizing this across the animal. So that's the other thing is, you know, making sure you're honoring the animal by not wasting any of it either.
Thank you.
All right.
So is there a specific author that you follow? Final question.
Yeah.
Is there a specific author that you follow or website to get ideas how to combine stuff?
No, it's literally my brain. That's very often my brain. If I'm like, yeah, I'll do this, and then I'll try it, and sometimes it'll work, and sometimes it won't work, and I'm like, what? Why did I do that? But I make cooking videos, and so if you go to my website, it's just indigenkitchen.com. There's a lot of videos. Some of them are recipes from the cookbook. A lot of them are not. But I will film a lot of things as well, and I try to turn it into a 1:30 long video where you get to see everything come together. So it makes it achievable, makes it make sense outside of the pages of the cookbook. And sometimes I try things and I'll film it and they will not work out at all. And then I will never edit that footage and no one will ever see it. But that's kind of, yeah, I dreamt up recipes when I was a little kid and I still get to do it today. So, yeah. All right. Who wants to assemble rolls? And it's okay if you don't want to. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna put my little situation together. I have some gloves here, so you don't have to get your hands dirty. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a couple pieces of meat here with a couple toothpicks, and we can use our steak strips, and we just want to roll up like little pinwheels. And you could do this at your table or you could do it here. So I'm gonna put these together and I'm gonna put my down. Okay. So I can see the dent here. So I'm gonna go with it. Okay. It's way too small for big people hands and way too large for little people. Toothpicks, then you have disassembled roll-ups. Then do you want me to show you guys kind of what we're doing first? Okay, maybe that would help, huh? Okay, so. This is. This on the sides, yes. Sorry. So then. So see how I kind of make a plus sign? X. And that ends up looking like that. Makes sense? I know you guys. You just want to trust you. Okay. So there's a little kit right there. These get cooked together, so. and gravy. Oh, two things.
You can do here too if you want. Or your game. You're right.
Sure. Alright, put three in that big. Even if it was straight. Just gonna grab. Yeah. You guys don't want to use the giant chicken onion. Don't feel like you need. Just use this. It's probably done it anyway, it's rolled up. And then bring them back up here when you're done. And then we'll cook them. Kind of a weird shape.
These are my first page.
The first thing I ever learned how to make was ramen. Which was very much from a package. It was the top ramen and I had to break it so the noodles weren't so long that I couldn't like eat them later. I don't know why ramen is the first thing I ever made. And then a lot of banana bread. These were veggies? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Even if he's cooking, like straight. Okay, so I'm gonna use this for the fish. That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. But now, yeah, you guys talk about these things for us. It took a lot longer because I kept tossing. I go to school actually. Yeah. They work a lot with. I'm not. Yeah. That's cute. It's too small stack. Okay. Yep, so make like a plus sign, so you guys can. Yeah, take like that and then make a kind of an X or a plus sign with veggies and that. Yeah, and then round the veggies. That's right now. You can take those off because now they have raw meat on them, so you can take them off. And I'm gonna cook these. And then you'll have a couple on your plate. No, drop it there. Outside, yep. Yes. Yep, and then you turn them inside out, and then your fingers never touch the raw meat part. I know. I don't know what the trash can. So I just-
I don't know what the trash can. So here's one point. This one.
Just go stack this up here.
Here's the other one, because it's cleaner in there.
My favorite dish. That's a good question. Can I get this dish one? It's like, there you go. I think it's pretty. And it's kind of fun.
I think the nearest, okay, that is where we have created. There it is.
Sure that cooking it all sides. Most important part, obviously. Yeah. It's a little bit more.
I know that's.
It's not like a chicken. I can have to cut all the way through the whole like peanut butter. Yeah. Really, I have a couple. Pears back there, but it's made of mix. Sure.
I don't need it every time.
Oh. That was my thought. Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, go for it. You can use that for you got it on your bed. More of these. So cute, so cute. Okay. Almost done. So when you go up to yeah, turn your I have a compound club. Yeah. If we don't get something during bow season, then I have a rifle, but like my rifle that much. Like I'd rather my bow. It's so nice and quiet. What's that? Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. What are they cut for?
Like,
Yeah.
there, because I'm not the one. So they usually both like the ass.
Yeah.
It's not from the young game.
But these cool up there. Yeah. Right. That's cool. And then if you want, you can get a fork, but you can also eat them with your fingers. It's not so video. But wait till they cool.
There's not.
Okay, you guys keep tracking with one of yours. There was a couple that had a couple roll ups here. And a couple of these.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's fine.
It's the little one, not all of them. But the one.
But the best thing we have to take a look at it. Yes, it was like that. I go like, we have private, we should do one where, you have. Like, I love.
There's a dance.
Okay, you need one.
I don't know who these are. Okay. We'll cook them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I just want
I'm gonna put
plates on the box.
for.
I can help you with self-grooming, and it's what sometimes you need to do. That's something that's our hair's already on that makeup beauty. So I think.
That little one, put it over us. Saying that. Keeping track of which one's going which way.
Oh, you just said, do you remember which one was? Yeah.
Was it this one? Did you make 2 roll ups? No, maybe it's these. If these were unplanned. Okay. But I was thinking that. Someone made two, but they had like a couple extra pieces of meat, so I just cooked up the meat separately. It's just. I'll just. Think that as. Someone's just gonna have that. Wait, is that yours? Well, yeah. Yes.
You want to say a quick thank you to the Zoom? Just because we're gonna wrap up on Zoom.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry you don't get to eat our delicious snacks with us, but thank you for joining us.
Yeah, but yes, thank you again. And for those who are watching on Zoom now, or if you're seeing this on YouTube, this is one of the benefits of, coming out to our events in person. Because then you get to try amazing food presented by incredible native chefs. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your weekend.